This morning we're going to pick up Deuteronomy again. In chapter 32 is where we're going to pick it up after last week. We've gone most of the way through the book of Deuteronomy, which of course is God's treaty with the people of Israel. He's presenting them with a treaty that they were familiar with. God, of course, is the ruling sovereign party, and the people are the submissive, surrendered party, supposedly. And so he presents the book of Deuteronomy, his law, to them in those terms and in that format because they recognize it. They start out with a historical section of identifying which each party is. This is who God is, and this is what he's done for the people, and this is how they've come together, and this is why this treaty is being presented in the first place. Then you get to the general stipulations, where it talks about the general concept of submission to the ruling authority, the people's submission to God and their obedience to him, and how God wants to bless them, and he wants them to be his people, and he wants this to work well and for them to cooperate and to have a good relationship. And then we get into the specific sanctions. These are the specific laws that Deuteronomy is known so well for. It takes up the bulk of the book, all the different dietary and customary and religious laws and social regulations and all the things that take place throughout the book of Deuteronomy. That's where that happens. These are the specific laws that the people were expected to follow as a sign and a show of their obedience and submission to their God. Next you get to the sanctions. That is what happens if you obey, the blessings that you bring upon yourself, and what happens if you disobey, the curses that you bring upon yourself. God says, Israel, if you obey me, I will bless you and make you prosperous beyond your wildest imagination. No nation on earth has ever seen the amount of prosperity that I will bring upon you if you obey me. I'll protect you. I'll keep you happy. I'll keep diseases away. I'll feed you well. Enemies won't be able to touch you. You'll be, fantastically rich, all this kind of stuff, if you obey me. On the other hand, if you disobey me and you disregard what I'm commanding you today, and you break our treaty that I'm making with you, all the power that I would have put into blessing you will now be turned, and I will put that amount of power into cursing you. And you'll experience famine, you'll experience disease, oppression from your neighbors. Finally, if it keeps on going all the way up to and including exile from the land, and I will give you the boot out of the land, and you'll have to be dispersed throughout other nations. I will destroy this country. I will wipe it out. And if you obey, you'll be blessed beyond your wildest imagination. But if you disobey, you'll be cursed and miserable beyond your wildest imagination as well. And again, we know from Bible history that that's unfortunately the way it unfolded. The people decided to disobey, and God brought about on them unbelievable amounts of problems and famine and oppression and difficulty and war and starvation and disease and all kinds of things. And it's really, really unfortunate. But we'll get to that later on in the Old Testament. Finally, we have the witnesses, those that were there to hear and to sign their name, supposedly, on the dotted line. These were the people that witnessed this transaction, this covenant being made, and they're saying, yes, we will abide by this. Finally, chapter 31 is preservation of the covenant. How is this to be passed on from generation to generation so that it lasts throughout time, as long as God would have it to be in effect? That was chapter 31. So we went through how they were to teach the children and the children's children and all these types of things. That's where the formal covenant style ends. That would have been about the end of a typical suzerain vassal treaty. However, the book of Deuteronomy is not just a typical treaty, nor is God a typical suzerain party. God is the omniscient God, and he knows things that most people don't know, and he can do things that most people don't do. And so he includes just a couple parts at the end of the book that we want to look at here before we get into the book of Joshua, after the preservation of the covenant in chapter 31. And in chapter 32, we see a song that God gave Moses to teach to the people. And he actually describes it in the end of chapter 31, verse 19. He says, "Now therefore write this song and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the people of Israel. For when I have brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to give to their fathers, and they've eaten and are full and are grown fat, and they're prosperous and they're happy and they're comfortable and relaxed, then they will turn to other gods and serve them and despise me, and they will break my covenant. And when many evils and troubles have come upon them, this song shall confront them as a witness, for it will live unforgotten in the mouths of their offspring. For I know that they are inclined to do even today, before I've brought them into the land that I swore to give." So Moses wrote this song the same day and taught it to the people of Israel. God says, I want you to do something. He says, I know what's going to happen when I bring them into the land. They're going to go in, they're going to move into their homes, everything will be conquered, the land will be theirs, crops will be growing, they'll be prosperous, they'll be comfortable, they'll be blessed by me, and they'll start to forget about me. They'll forget who I am, they'll forget what they've been through, they forget that they owe everything that they have and who they are to me. And they'll start to turn to the other false gods of the people around them, and they'll start to fall into idolatry, and they'll disobey the covenant that they agreed to this very day. They will turn away from me, and they will incur my wrath and my punishment and my curses upon them. That's what's going to happen. And so, Moses, what I want you to do is I want you to write this top 10 pop hit for them, this song that I'm going to give to them, and I want you to teach them to sing it. And it's all about what will happen to them if and when, because they will, when they disobey me. And when they can't figure out why they're having so many problems and why life is so hard and why their crops aren't growing and why they're being oppressed and they're losing all the battles to their enemies and disease is coming and all the things that are going on, and they can't figure out why things are so hard and why life is so bad, they're going to go back home and they're going to sing this song. And every time they sing this song, whether they realize it or not, which they should if they're listening to what they're singing, they will be pronouncing to themselves exactly why all these problems are taking place. So Moses, I want you to write this song for the people to sing. And it says in verse 21, when many evils and troubles have come upon them, this song shall confront them as a witness. And it says, for it will live unforgotten in the mouths of their offspring. They will remember this song from generation to generation to generation, and it will not go away. Just as a side note, and it's not important, but it's just how my mind works. Wouldn't you love to hear how the song went? So catchy that it went on for generation after generation. I mean, these days, you think of, a song from back in the 50s or whatever. Nobody remembers it anymore unless you're alive back then. But nobody cares about those songs. That's an oldie. Unless you're really super into oldies or whatever, you're probably not going to listen to it. This one was, for whatever reason, whether it was a catchy tune, whether it was just ingrained in their culture, I don't know. But this song, God says, will be remembered generation after generation after generation. And they will continue to sing this song. But every time they sing it, they are indicting themselves for their own disobedience. And I won't read through the entirety of the song in chapter 32, but it must have been a really catchy one. Like I said, it was on the top 10 Billboard charts for 90, 100 years, whatever it was, a long time, and they kept on singing it, indicting themselves, accusing themselves every time they did. And it makes you wonder if the people actually stopped to listen to the words that they themselves were singing, convicting themselves of their own disobedience. Just a little snip of them. This is out of the first verse. I don't know if this had choruses or not. I don't know how they sang back then. Chapter 32, verse 4, the rock, referring to God, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. But they, the people, have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children because they are blemished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is he not your Father who created you, who made you and established you? He continues on there to talk about what God has done for the people. Verse 15, but Jeshurun, another name for Israel, grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and stout and sleek. Then he forsook the God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods that they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. Again, skip down to verse 23. I will heap disasters upon them, and I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence, and I will send the teeth of beasts against them with the venom of things that crawl in the dust. Outdoors the sword shall be reeve, and indoors terror, for young man and woman alike, the nursling child with the man of gray hairs. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory, had I not feared provocation by the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not the Lord who did all this. Verse 34, is not this laid up in store with me, sealed in my treasuries? Vengeance is mine, and recompense, For the time when their foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity is at hand, for their doom comes swiftly. By the way, did you catch that little phrase there that's known in other places of the scripture there? Verse 35, vengeance is mine and recompense, or vengeance is mine, I will repay, I believe some other translations say. That's where this phrase comes from, right here in the song of indictment against the people. So later on in scripture, when God talks about personal vengeance and he says, don't you take vengeance, that's my job. And he quotes this verse right here where he says, I will take vengeance upon the Israelites for their disobedience that they will commit against me, and I will avenge myself against them. For the Lord, verse 36, will vindicate his people, and he will have compassion on his servants when they turn back to him. When he sees that their power is gone and there is none remaining, bond or free. Isn't that a catchy tune? Wouldn't you love to sing that as you're walking down the road, bebopping with your little ear thingies in, playing through your iPhone, playing music, and you're bebopping to the song and you're singing the words along, indicting yourself and accusing yourself, excuse me, of your own disobedience against God and justifying his condemnation and wrath against you? Wouldn't you love to know how that tune went? Wow, that'd be fascinating. It's just always been a curiosity to me. But they sang the song generation after generation, and Moses wrote it down and he gave it to the people and said, here, people, here's a smash hit for you that you're going to be singing for a long, long time about how you'll disobey when you get into the land and how God will be punishing you. So it's a fascinating chapter. The omniscient God, knowing the people's hearts better than they themselves, instructs Moses to write this song for the people to sing throughout the generations as a witness of their own disobedience and idolatry. It's about Israel's turning from God once they're in the land, about their idolatry and abandonment of the covenant, about God's judgment on them, and even about God redeeming and then later vindicating his people once they return back to him. Well, that brings us to chapter 33. Chapter 33 is kind of similar to what we saw in Genesis and other places. They go through, Moses goes through, similar to Jacob's blessing for his sons. He blesses the different tribes with predictive blessings. As you read through, he says, here's for the tribe of Asher, here's for the tribe of Zebulun, here's about Levi, and here's Judah. And he goes through and he gives predictive blessings is what I'll call it. He kind of talks about the character of the tribe and what they will accomplish for the different tribes of Israel. Simeon, by the way, is not mentioned in this chapter. I'm not going to pretend to know why. I'm not exactly sure. The best guess that I could find in a commentary is that because of the way the land was divided out, Simeon was kind of in the middle of Judah, and it kind of, over the years, just kind of became assimilated with the tribe of Judah. And so maybe that's why it isn't specifically mentioned here, because they would have kind of got lumped in with Judah's. I'm not sure if I entirely buy that or not, but that's the only guess I could find. So, if anybody here can come up with a more rational and more biblical explanation than that, I'd be happy to hear it. So share it with me, because I have no idea why Simeon's not included. But the other tribes there, they go through and they bless each tribe and give them kind of a prediction of what their future will be. Finally, we come to the last chapter of Deuteronomy, this amazing book, and it's a fascinating chapter again. Chapter 34 records the death of Moses, and what a special death it was. The last thing he saw before he died was the Promised Land. Moses, of course, as you know, was not allowed to go into the Promised Land. He struck the rock in front of the people instead of speaking to it. He disobeyed God in the presence of the entire Israelite community. And God says, you disobeyed me, you dishonored me there. You misrepresented the picture I was trying to give the people. I was trying to teach the people something through this, and you completely messed it up. As the leader, as my representative, you did this in front of all the people. So I cannot allow you to go into the land, but I will let you see it. And as you stand on the far side of the Jordan River and you look across the river, I'll let you see the land that you will never get to enter, but that the people will get to enter and they will inherit this land. So it talks about how God tells Moses to climb up the mountain and to go up the mountain and look over on across, I should say, at the land that the people would inherit. Verse 5, it says, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, went up the mountain, and after he'd seen all the land, it says, the servant of the Lord, he died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he, God himself, buried him in the land of Moab, opposite of Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed, his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. Then the days of weeping and moaning for Moses were ended. Continuing in verse 10, he says, "And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all of his servants and to all of his land, and for all the mighty powers and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all of Israel." Again, I don't want to make more of it than it should be. It's a kind of a small passage here, but what a fascinating passage. I don't think there's anybody else in Scripture, I've read through it several times, nowhere else in the Bible does it say that God himself personally provided the funeral service for a person like he did for Moses. God went and he personally buried Moses in a place undisclosed for a good reason, I'm sure. The book of Jude actually just talks about that, about disputes over the body of Moses. I'm assuming these two passages are probably related. But God hides the body of Moses. He personally buries him. He personally conducts the one-on-one private funeral service. And God himself provides a eulogy for Moses here in a way that he doesn't do for anybody else in Scripture. He says, "This was my guy. There was no other prophet in the history of Israel who did what I gave him to do, who did the miraculous signs and wonders that I gave him to perform, and who did such amazing things in the sight of not only Israel, but all of the world." So God himself took care of the burial and even provided a eulogy for him, for his servant Moses, his close friend who he spoke with face to face, unlike he did any other person in all of human history. And God provides the funeral service, a summary of it right here, how God himself buried him and provided the service for Moses. But he never got to go into the land. But one other thing he did do, God also was taking care of the children of Israel at the same time. He knew they would need another leader. So in verse 9 of chapter 34 and some previous passages in chapter 31 and stuff that we kind of skipped over for time's purposes, but God didn't leave Israel alone and abandoned at this time. He knew they would need another leader. And so in verse 9 it says, "And Joshua the son of Nun was full of spirit and wisdom, for Moses had laid hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord commanded Moses." God raised up, he assigned, he commissioned Joshua in chapters 31 and 32. And he said, "Moses is now gone, but I provide you another leader in the man named Joshua. And this will be your leader as you cross the river and go into the promised land that I promised to give you." And that's how the book of Deuteronomy ends. But while the book of Deuteronomy ends here, it flows perfectly into the very next book, which is the book of Joshua, that we will study now. That blue doesn't show up real well, does it? Or is it just a small screen? Because is that a little bit more legible behind me than it is on the TV that I'm looking at? Okay, good. That's cool. Most of it's in yellow anyway, so it doesn't matter. The book of Joshua, just one page over, passing of God's baton from Moses to the next leader. They said, "Our pastor has just retired. It is time for us to elect a new pastor." Oh, wait, that's our church, isn't it? By the way, if you hadn't heard, last Sunday we did elect a new pastor. Pastor Hatcher is now our senior pastor, and so that transition will be taking place. But the same thing is going on here. There was no election. God assigned a person. Okay, there was no white smoke or black smoke coming out of the Vatican City chimney, nothing like that. But God said, "Here will be your next leader to lead you into the land." His name is Joshua. He's been an assistant and a helper to Moses for years and years and years and years. He's one of the spies that went into the land 40 years ago, one of the only two that came back with a positive report. This will be your guide to lead you into the land. The author, of course, we believe is Joshua. The readers were the people of Israel, that second generation who would be crossing the Jordan into Canaan. The message is that God continues his covenant with Israel after the death of Moses and gives blessing in proportion to their obedience. There's the catch. But overall, Joshua is a very positive book. Structure, I kind of divide it up like this. I split it right in half, and it works really well, nice and even. First 12 chapters are about conquering the land. The people go into the land, they conquer the land, and they settle in there. And then chapters 13 through 24 are the distribution of the land and settling of the land. You have to conquer it. You have to defeat the people who are living there. You have to move into their cities. You have to disband the natives, the Canaanites who are living there that God told them to wipe out and to judge. And then you have to distribute the land tribe by tribe, and then the people have to settle in. So that's what this book covers. It's been just a little while since we've gone through this, so I think it's time for another update. You'll recognize this chart here. How are we doing on the covenant that God gave to Abraham so many years ago? How are we doing? Well, as far as the land, the nation, and the ultimate leader, the ultimate seed, let's kind of take these in reverse order. The ultimate seed, we thought for a while, might have been Moses, didn't we? He was speaking with God face to face. He provided the law that people could communicate with God through their sacrificial Levitical system. He turned out to be a great leader for the people. And we thought for a while, maybe he could be the leader that God had promised. But there was a problem with Moses, wasn't there? Something happened with Moses that kind of disqualifies him from being the ultimate picture, or the ultimate seed that God had promised clear back in the garden. What happened with Moses? Two things, kind of, wasn't it? Number one was he sinned before the people, right, and dishonored God before all the people. That's probably not a great sign. And number two, he died without sin being truly taken care of. Yeah, they had sacrifices to cover it, and they could go slaughter their animals, and God said, I will take this as a temporary coat of paint over your sin, but it doesn't really eliminate it. It doesn't really take care of the problem. And every time we have more sin, we have to have another coat of paint over it to cover it up again. Another sacrifice, another bull, another ram, another sheep, whatever it was, to cover that sin kind of again for a while until the next day, and you sin all over again. Then you have to bring another sheep or goat or lamb or something like that to cover another coat of blood paint over that sin. And while it covers it for a while and it pacifies my anger for a while and demonstrates your faith in my ultimate deliverance, it doesn't really eliminate the sin. It's just a thin coat of, I'd say whitewash, it was more like red wash, wasn't it? A thin coat of red wash over your sin, but it doesn't really eliminate it. That's what the sacrificial system did, and that's what Moses provided to the people. Well, what God through Moses provided to the people. But it didn't really eliminate the sin the way that God talked about back in the garden. The relationship with God was mended, kind of, but it wasn't really restored to perfection like it was in the garden. And when God says, someday I'm going to send an ultimate seed, he will crush that serpent's head. Even though the serpent bruises his heel, so the serpent's head, Satan's head, will be crushed. Sin will be eliminated. The relationship will be restored. And none of that happened before Moses died. And once Moses died, he can't do any more saving or rescuing. As I said before, that I've heard a teacher say, a dead Messiah doesn't do anybody any good because he's dead and he can't save and rescue anybody. So Moses died and the sin problem was not truly alleviated. So we have to look for somebody else. What about the nation? God promised that Abraham would become a great nation. He promised to be a father of many nations, by the way, but this one in particular, the nation, has God provided and delivered on that portion of the promise? Yes? No? Maybe so? I don't know. Yes, he surely has. He took care of this in the book of Exodus when the people came out, and he made a covenant with them. Then after they kind of blew it at the River Jordan, even then the second generation, and he reiterated the covenant with them in the book of Deuteronomy that we just covered. And here's where he really signed, sealed, and formalized his treaty with them, and he made them a true nation, because suzerain and vassal treaties don't take place with non-national people. They take places with nations. And so God formalized their status with this treaty that he just signed with them in the book of Deuteronomy. And how about the land? Did God provide for them a land? Did God provide for the people a land that he had promised? Kind of, didn't he? The land is actually provided in the book of Joshua. Yeah. So here we go. This is where God delivers on that portion of the promise. Okay? Start out in chapter 1, after the death of Moses that we just read about in Deuteronomy. The servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I'm giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, towards the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do all according to all that the law of Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it from the right hand or the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God calls Joshua, and he kind of recommissions him again. He says, you are the new leader. Be strong and be courageous. If you didn't pick that up, he repeated it about 3 or 4 times in this passage. And if you go back to Deuteronomy 31 and 32, where he's commissioning him as well, he keeps telling Joshua over and over and over and over and over, be strong and courageous, strong and courageous, strong and courageous, almost like a broken record. And for whatever reason, just as I was re-preparing this lesson over this last week, that caught my eye again. He tells them to be strong and courageous so many times. Why? I mean, obviously, because he wants them to be strong and courageous, duh. But he repeats it so many times, it almost makes me wonder. I mean, Moses had to be strong and courageous, didn't he? He's battling Sihon and Og and Pharaoh and all that. But as far as I know, I don't think God ever told Moses specifically strong and courageous. But Joshua, he's constantly saying, be strong and courageous, strong and courageous, strong and courageous. I wonder why he tells him so many times to be strong and courageous. Lots of people had to be strong and courageous. But he repeats that to Joshua over and over and over and over. It almost makes me wonder if maybe something about Joshua's personality wasn't naturally a strong, bold, charismatic, strong, and courageous guy. I don't know. I'm totally guessing here. I'm not trying to read into things. And, this is just me thinking off the top of my head. Don't put more weight than you should. But he's always telling Joshua, be strong and courageous, as if this wouldn't come naturally to him. Joshua had seen all the miracles. He'd gone through the sea. Sinai and all. He'd seen everything. But he still has to tell Joshua, strong and courageous, strong and courageous, strong and courageous, as you lead this people. I don't know. Maybe there's nothing to it. Maybe I'm reading more into it. But maybe Joshua wasn't just a naturally strong and courageous kind of guy. So God has to keep repeating, be strong and courageous, because I am with you. As long as you obey, as long as you don't turn from the right or left of what I told Moses, I will be with you. Nobody can stand against you. You will have 100% success, because I'm fighting behind you. Be strong and courageous. This is why, strong and courageous, strong and courageous. And so Joshua assumes command of the people. He replaces Moses. Now, if you're the people, what's going through your mind as a person, as Joe Q. Israelite? Moses, the man of God who's led your parents out of Egypt. You've heard of the Sinai story and the Red Sea and all the, the manna, the wilderness, all the different stories. You've heard of all these things, and you've grown up walking around in the wilderness under the man of Moses. Now Moses is gone. You're staring across the river at this land full of Anakites, big, huge giants that you're going to go in and supposedly conquer. The giants that are so big that your parents wimped out and they said, we're not going to do it. Now it's your job. But the leader who has been God's man for decades since you came out of Egypt is now gone. What are you thinking? What's your big question? In a much smaller scale, you could say, we have had a pastor for the last 33, 4, whatever it is, years. And he's led us well, and we've been a great church, but now he's retiring. And we're going to get a new pastor. And what will some people's response be to this? Again, I'm not trying to make an analogy that's, overextended or whatever, but what's your thought? Is it a little bit of maybe what? Uneasiness, maybe? A little uncertainty? Will God be with the people? Can we still do the same things now that Moses is gone? Moses is the one that did all these miraculous things. Now we don't have our Moses anymore. How are we supposed to go and conquer these people without our Moses? We need our Moses. And Moses is buried somewhere up on the mountain. God didn't even tell us where. And we didn't even get to attend the funeral because it was a secret. And now we have no Moses. We're supposed to cross this river and fight all these huge giants and do amazing things, but we have no Moses. And so God has to really what? not just assign a leader, but he's got to make sure that the people are on board. He's got to convince them that this Joshua guy can lead you just as well as Moses, because in reality, who split the Red Sea, and who fought Sihon and Og, and who brought down the manna, and who gave the commandments on Sinai, who did all the stuff? I'll give you a clue. It was not Moses. Who was it? It was God. So the real question is God with Joshua like he was with Moses? When Joshua says, go out and do something because God is with us, will God really be with Joshua and the people the way he was with Moses and the people? And this is a big concern because their lives are in the balance here. I mean, in our church and our situation, by the way, it's the same concept applies. We worship God and we follow him and his word regardless of who our pastor is, right? Now we can make foolish decisions and do stupid stuff, but at the end of the day, we follow God, and God can be with us with a new pastor just like he can be with us with our old pastor. I don't know if anybody needed that reassurance or not, but if you do, there it is. Now back to the book of Joshua. But the people are, where was I even going with that? Now I forget. Anyway, the people are looking across, their lives are in the balance. They have to go fight. So Joshua assumes command in chapter 1, and he assures the people in verse 5, we already read through it. He said, no man will be able to stand you, just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Then he continues, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous because I promise I will be with you every bit as much as I was with Moses. I can work with Moses, but I'm a pretty tough God. I can also work with you, Joshua, whether you're large and bold and charismatic and aggressive, or whether you're by nature a more quiet and reserved and timid kind of guy. I don't care. I can use anybody because it's my strength anyway, so it really doesn't matter. As long as you obey what I tell you to do, you will be okay. And so Joshua is presented to the people, and the people say what? Specifically in this case, it's the tribes east of the Jordan who settled there, but all these people come to him, and they answered, verse 16, they answered Joshua, these people, the Israelites, they said, all that you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Verse 17, just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your command and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be, there it is again, poor guy, be strong and courageous. Don't be wimpy. God is with you. We, the people, are also with you as long as, what does it say? We, Israel, are with you, Joshua, as long as God is with you like he was with Moses. This is important. In fact, it's beyond important. It's absolutely critical here. As long as God is with Joshua, we will follow Joshua. Will he be with Joshua? Well, we kind of hope so. We kind of hope so, don't we? We're going to put that thought on hold for just a little bit, and we will come back to it. But in the meantime here, the book of Joshua interjects chapter 2, and it almost seems to break up the flow of the story. But again, it's another insertion that's very important, and we want to look at that first. It's the story of Rahab and the spies. And before Joshua and the people cross the river Jordan and go into the land, they want to send out spies. Now, last time they were camped by Jordan and they sent out spies. The 12 came back, 10 were, and 2 were. And the people looked at the spies and they said, we're going to go with the majority vote. We can't do it. Let's wander around in the wilderness because that sounds safer. That's what they said. So it's kind of a risky proposition, isn't it? Here we are 40 years later. We're camped in the same spot by the Jordan, and we're going to do what again? We're going to send out more spies? Are we sure this is a great idea? Is this really the best move here? I mean, last time this is what sunk our ship for 40 years, but we're going to do it again. But he does it a little bit different. He doesn't send out 12 and come back and have a great big public report. It says, chapter 2, verse 1, Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly. He says, I want to have a feel of what's going on over there, but we don't want to make this a public vote like we did last time. We don't want to repeat this mistake. And so he sent these 2 guys. He says, I want you to go across the river. I want you to see what's over there, especially with regards to the city of Jericho, because I think that's where we're headed first. And so we will summarize this. I'm going to just kind of give you the story here quickly for time's sake. The guys go over into Jericho, but they're spotted They're wearing their little Israeli flag emblems, and that probably wasn't a great move as a spy. And so they say, the king of Jericho says, aha, I think these guys are spies. Let's track them down. Somebody says, aha, I think I've seen where they went. Well, where they went was they got into the city, and they said, let's kind of blend in. What we're going to do is go to a prostitute's house and spend our time there. I would love to know the conversation and the rationale why these two guys, as spies in a foreign land, said, here's the best plan of action. We're going to go spend our spying time here, however long that was, at a prostitute's house. This is a wise idea. Maybe they thought they'd blend in and not be spotted going into that house because a lot of guys did. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure what the rationale was. Obviously, it was divinely providentially orchestrated because of the way the story plays out. But what the rationale at the time was, I really don't know. I would love to hear that conversation, but in English so I could understand it. So they're walking down the road. They get to Jericho. They say, here's where we're hiding out. We're hiding out at Rahab, the prostitute's house. Up they go. The king of Jericho hears about this. Knock, knock, knock on the door. Hey, Rahab, open up. We hear that you've been entertaining spies from Israel. As you know, Rahab, these are national threats to us right now. We know what the Israelites have done. We've heard how God brought them out of Egypt. We heard how he marched them through the Red Sea. We've heard of all the amazing things God has done with them. These people are unstoppable. And here you are harboring their spies. You're in big trouble, Rahab. Now, who is Rahab at this point? I'm a prostitute. Yeah. But put yourself in the Jerichoites. Is that the word? Jericonians? The Jericho people. Put yourself in their shoes. Rahab is a what? She is, thank you. Somebody actually spoke out loud. She is a traitor. She is harboring fugitives from the national enemy number one. Okay? So in the eyes of the Jericho people, she's in big trouble, and she is a traitor to her own people because she's harboring these spies. So she opens the door after she has ushered these guys upstairs and hid them under a bunch of flax. She's probably getting ready to make some linen or whatever she's going to do with it. But she's got a pile of these weeds on her roof, flax to make cloth. She hides them underneath there, and she goes down and opens the door. Hi, what can I do for you? Rahab, we hear that you've been entertaining spies. These are Israelites. You better hand them over right now because this is a big deal. They are casing out our city to destroy us. Hand them over. Well, yeah, you're right. They did come in here and they spent the night, you guys typically do here. But they took off just before they closed the city gates the other night. I think they headed off that direction, and if you go really fast, you could probably catch them. They headed down that road. All right, thanks, Rahab. And off they go. And they go zooming out the gate, and they go down the road looking for the spies who they will never find. Because the spies aren't on the road. The spies are on the roof hiding under a pile of weeds in Rahab's apartment. She goes back up. She uncovers the flags. She said, well, guys, here's what's going on. They just came and asked for you. I gave them the slip. I sent them out the other way. But we all know what is going to happen to Jericho. You guys are unstoppable because your God is amazing. We've heard all the stories. So here's the deal. I have just saved your life. In rejection of my own people, knowing that my own seed is going to be destroyed, I have turned traitor on them and their gods and the culture, the whole way of life. I am now aligning myself with you too. I want you to make me a promise. When, and not if, but when you come and destroy the city, because I know it's going to happen, I would like you, in return for my protection of you, for you to protect me as well. Spare my life and my family. So the spies said, okay, you have been kind to us. You have aligned yourself with us, the Israelites, who will destroy your city. You're correct. And so here's what we do. When we come to destroy the city, everybody who is living right here in this apartment will be saved. You, your father, your brothers, sisters, your family, your immediate family who is with you in this apartment. They can't be outside walking around, whatever. If they're outside, null and void, all bets are off. But if they're in the apartment here with you, we will save you. So she tied a red rope and then she led them down the outside of the wall because her apartment was built into the city wall. She let them down, and they said before they left, all right, when we come back, you tie this red rope in your window. And I don't know if it's hanging down or if she tied it in a cute little bow tie, to be inconspicuous. I don't know, whatever it is. But it was hanging there in her window, this red rope was. And when this red rope is in the window and we destroy the city, we will spare you and your family. Deal. Done. Okay. So the spies went down the rope, And off they went. She said, by the way, hide out in the hills for 3 days. That's the typical search time for our bounty hunter guys. They will not find you. They'll come back to the city. After those 3 days, you're free to go back. Okay, so that's what they did. And so in that way, they departed. They went into the hills. Finally, the spies went back to Israel. The 2 men returned. They came down to the hills, passed over, came to Joshua the son of Nun. They told him all that had happened to them. Verse 24, and they said to Joshua, truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melted away. They're terrified of us. They're afraid of us because they know what God will do. Like I said, this kind of interrupts the narrative that we had before of where they're getting ready to cross the Jordan and go in and capture the land, and Joshua's just been instituted and everybody's excited and on board, and they insert this story of Rahab into the narrative. Why? Why do we care about Rahab? What's going on here? What are we to see? What is the story of Rahab? What's the significance, or what would have been the significance to the people? Let me partially ask this to hopefully help you think it through yourself. Who was God's chosen people, and who was he rescuing, and who is he on the side of? God is the God of Israel, his chosen people, the descendants of Abraham. But something very, very weird has just happened in the story, hasn't it? We've found somebody else who now has decided to be also faithful to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is not descended from them. In fact, this person is about of the weirdest kind of person, the most unexpected person you could think of to align himself with the God of Israel. Who is this person? Who is this person? This person is first of all, not of God's chosen people. This was a Canaanite of all people, the very people that God said, you must go in and destroy them 100%, don't leave anybody left alive. That's who this person is. This person is a Canaanite. But not just any Canaanite. She was a woman, and she was not even just a respectable woman. She was a prostitute woman. This is a bottom-of-the-barrel person. A Canaanite prostitute woman. You don't get much lower than that, okay, in the eyes of Israel. But that's who this person was. But she decided to disregard her people and her way of life and her God. She said, I recognize and submit that your God is the true God. Nobody else can do this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to rebel against him. Instead am going to choose to submit and ally myself to him. I am at his disposal. I will submit to him, and I want to be on his side. So, as a means of showing this, she hid the spies. She followed their instructions. She feared God, and in doing so, she saved her own family. In fact, a couple chapters back here in chapter 6, we'll read this passage in just a minute. But she ended up saving her family, and she also ended up helping Israel, who was her own country's worst enemy. But she helped the enemy, who was God's chosen people. She allied herself with God and his people, turned her back on her own people. Chapter 6, and we're going to skip ahead just a couple chapters here as we finish this up, kind of finishes out the story of Rahab, and I debated if I want to skip ahead this far, but I want to complete the story here. Chapter 6, verse 22, it says, but the 2 men who had spied out the land, we just talked about them, Joshua said, this is after they'd gone in and they defeated Jericho, okay? This is skipping ahead a little bit. But it said, Joshua said to these 2 guys, it says, go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her as you swore to her. So she was saved. She was rescued. Of all her people, of all the people in Jericho, this one woman and her family were the only survivors. So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all who belonged to her, and they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the rest of the city with fire and everything in it, only the gold and the silver, the vessels, the bronze, and the iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab, verse 25, the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Pagan woman, horrible character, bottom-of-the-barrel person, but she allied herself with the God of Israel, and she not only saved herself, but what ended up happening to her throughout time, as the end of chapter 6 said, actually in verse, the end of verse 25. And she has lived in Israel, what's the next phrase? to this day. She was actually assimilated into the nation of Israel. This is crazy. But she's not an Israelite. She is not an Israelite. She is a pagan, Canaanite, prostitute woman who's done all kinds of who knows what throughout her life. But God has, because of her faith and her actions and her submission to God, God has allowed her to come in and be one of, can we even say it out loud? One of his what? One of his chosen people? Is this possible? Can this happen? That almost calls into question what it really means to be like one of God's children, doesn't it? Is there more to it than just genetic inheritance? Can God take other people who demonstrate faith in him and make them one of his? This is revolutionary. This has never happened before. This is an extremely amazing chapter. God took Rahab from a Canaanite, and now she is part of the Israelite people because of her submission and obedience to God. But not only that, we know from much, much later in Scripture, clear back in Matthew chapter 1, we're not going to go to it, but Matthew chapter 1 gives the lineage of none other than who? The Messiah himself. And do you know who shows up in this most amazingly gifted family of the entire human race? Do you know whose name shows up there? Some pagan Canaanite prostitute woman who chose to obey. Unbelievable. This is unbelievable. This is a remarkable turn of events. This woman was elevated to the highest family in the entire human race because of what she did. She turned her back on her own people. She's a traitor, but a traitor to be aligned with the true God. And God took her in, accepted her, made her one of his Israelite people, plus made her one of the chosen family. That's mind-boggling. It really, really makes you think that there's more to being an Israelite than just being an Israelite, that God can accept really anybody who's willing to obey and submit to him. There's the lesson, isn't it? That's a pretty powerful story. We're out of time. We'll continue next week. Dear God, we thank you this morning for these books that we've gone through. We did not get very far this morning. I thought we'd get farther in Joshua than we did, but there's so much here, and it's such good stuff. We can't skip over it. This is such a pivotal message because you did this not only just for Rahab, but really you've done it for all of us New Testament Gentile believers. What you did for her then is exactly what you do for us today. We are not your biologically chosen people. Your people are Israel, and they will always be your people, but you have chosen, like Romans says, to graft us in for a while. Because of your mercy and your care for us, you have chosen to allow us, through our faith in you, to become one of your people in every way and to be as much of your people as the Israelites are. You are so amazingly kind and generous and forgiving and merciful and all those things. We are so thankful you do that, because if you didn't do that, we would not be here. You could have stuck to just your people and excluded it to just Israelites and Jewish people, but you don't. You open it up to everybody who's willing to have faith in you and obey you. And like I said, that's why we're here. That's why all the New Testament Gentile believers are where we are today. Thank you for the story and for what you do for us, for what you teach us in these stories, because it is absolutely relevant to us as well. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Thank you very much. You're dismissed, and sadly we only got through chapter 2.